You're listening to
and such a short amount of time to do it in. We were really
a Mamma Mia podcast.
Well, hey, how are you feeling? If you're one of 10 million Australians who are in lockdown this week, you're probably feeling pretty shit. And if you're not in lockdown, as much as I'd like to hope that you are thriving, the last 18 months have been so rough. And we've all learned by now that the prospect of a lockdown for any of us is always looming around the corner. It's like we climb this mountain and it's really hard, but then we keep rolling back to the bottom and we have to start again, except in tougher conditions. The solidarity among states and the whole world seems to have evaporated, and our political leaders are hurling sledges at each other, and things feel, well, they feel pretty bleak. I'm not going to lie. Which brings me to today. Originally, we had this interview scheduled for a few weeks' time, but it feels like we're in the middle of yet another crisis. And as a podcast host, I can't hold a syringe or help with contact tracing, but what I can do is provide some hope and some distraction and some practical support. What we all need to keep going through setback after setback, disappointment after disappointment, is resilience. And so I reached for the big guns. From Mamma Mia, I'm Mia Friedman, and you're listening to No Filter, a podcast where people from all walks of life tell their stories very candidly and aren't afraid to be vulnerable. Hugh van Cuylenberg's job is to teach resilience. He was a primary school teacher volunteering in northern India when he had a life-changing realisation. Despite the underprivileged community that the children in the village were from, they were super positive. By contrast, back in Australia, even before COVID, Hugh knew that all too many people found it hard to be happy or suffered from mental illnesses such as depression and anxiety. His own little sister had been ravaged by anorexia. So how was it that young people he knew at home who had food and shelter and friends and privilege and a loving family struggled so much with their mental health, while these little kids in India seemed so contented and resilient? Hugh decided to find out, and he learned that there are 3 key traits and behaviours that are the keys to resilience. And now he teaches resilience to others at conferences and at live events and in his book called The Resilience Project. So if you're feeling a bit shit right now, or if you've ever felt a bit shit, this one's for you. Hey Hugh, how you going?
It's a pretty loaded question these days, isn't it?
Yeah.
I'm going okay today. How are you going?
Never better. I'm thriving. As we are talking, it's the end of week 3 for us, and in Melbourne, you're going into another 5 days. It's the 5th lockdown Melbourne and Victoria have had to go into. And I'd like to think that everybody else around the country is going great guns, but I think we all know by now that we're just one press conference away from lockdown.
Totally. I was in Hobart doing my shows I had Hobart and Launceston, and I was coming back to Melbourne to my wife and the kids were going to go skiing, and I had 4 days at home by myself writing for the next book. And I love my wife and I love my kids, but I was pretty excited about 4 days to myself. House was going to be clean. I was going to be listening to classical music and writing and drinking tea and coffee. And I did a show in Hobart, and I got off stage and put my phone on, and I found out we had 7 cases and it's a likely lockdown. And we'll get into this later, but I feel like one of the things I've really learned, and do you know what, Mia? I've actually never ever written notes before for a podcast interview. I've actually written notes today because I feel like a lot of today can be about maybe some of the stuff I learned in Melbourne's first lockdown that might help people now. Not saying, hey, do it like me, but there might be some things that resonate with people. But anyway,
yeah,
I feel like one of the key things is at the moment, expectations are always quite a dangerous thing. I think for a lot of us, we have these expectations in our life that end up causing great anxiety and stress. Right now, you cannot really have expectations on anything. You can hope to do things, It's kind of like becoming a parent for the first time. You realise you can't expect to do anything. You can hope to do things, but the second you expect it to happen, you're going to be disappointed.
Oh, I like that. Because I was going to say it's one thing to have expectations for yourself, like, I'm going to achieve this and be realistic about what you can actually do. But what I think is really hard is that idea of having to live without being able to plan for the future even tomorrow.
Yeah. Hope and optimism are really big part of being mentally healthy and mentally well, being an optimistic person. But I feel like a lot of the things we look forward to in our lives have been taken away from us. And I didn't write this in my notes, but I do think one of the important things you need to do right now, if you're in lockdown, is to plan something. So when you go to bed at night, you think to yourself, what am I looking forward to most tomorrow? And if you can't think of anything, then organise something in that moment. Even if it's, I know having a wine with someone over Zoom isn't anywhere near as exciting as going to the pub and having a wine with someone, but just schedule something you're looking forward to the next day, I think is really important, because optimism is a big part of being happy.
Hugh, a lot of people in Sydney have been talking about how this time, this lockdown, this period that we're going through feels harder, because last year during the first lockdown, there was a lot of adrenaline. Everyone was in it together. There were free online concerts. Wine, trivia, Zoom was a novelty.
Yeah.
And it feels like now that has all gone to shit.
Yeah.
How do we get that optimism and that hope?
For a lot of people who've never heard of me before and they see, oh, he's like a wellbeing person or he's like a self-help person, I hate that description of what I do, the work I do, because I don't sit here and say, do this and you'll feel happy, do that, and why don't you should do this and you feel happy. And I'm not saying be like me. Like right now, like you, I'm in the trenches and I'm finding life quite hard as well. So I'm not saying, hey, everyone, be like me. So I want to put that caveat on everything I say today, just for people who haven't heard me speak before. That everyone who has heard me speak will know that I'm a fumbling mess when I try and present stuff. But I was thinking it was Virginia Trioli, I think, the other day in the morning on ABC Radio in Melbourne said, when we went back into lockdown again, she was on the radio and she said, Melbourne, we're steel. We got through this last time, we'll get through this again. And I felt enormous strength looking back on what we go through, what we went through last year. I think it was 124 days we had in a row of hard stage 4 lockdown. And I look back on that time and I think I am so proud of what we did. I've always felt proud to be Australian and I've felt proud to be in Victoria, whatever, but I've never felt prouder than to be a Melburnian after last year. Like I feel this strong connection to my city in that we went through something unbelievably hard together. And I'll tell you what you've got to look forward to, Mia. I'm not trying to downplay how hard it is right now. The first time I went to a cafe in October last year after 125 days, the first time I went to a cafe, that I went to a pub, that I went to the movies, that I went to the football, whatever it was, and I sat there with my friends, I actually sat there and I totally appreciated how unbelievably lucky we are to be able to go to lunch with our friends, to be able to go to live music. If you asked me in February last year, are you grateful that you get to go to a cafe with your friends? I'd go, yeah, of course I am. I wasn't really. I wasn't really. When Sydney opens up again, which it will at some point in the near future, I don't know when, you just wait. It is the most amazingly euphoric, beautiful, connected feeling you'll get as a city when you go, oh my gosh, we're back together. It's the most amazing feeling. And I love that. Like I remember October last year, it's spring, the weather's coming good again, we're stepping out again, and it felt, I've never enjoyed being in a cafe more. I've never enjoyed being in a pub more. I've never enjoyed just like seeing people. It was really amazing. And for me, COVID last year, and still is doing, it really has shone a light on the fact that we are taking way too much for granted. We're taking we need everything to be perfect for us to have a good time. Oh, how was the cafe? Oh, we sat in the worst table. Food took too long there. No, life's imperfect. We got to accept that, and then let's just really enjoy the good stuff as it happens, because I think we need to. And again, I don't want to downplay what anyone's going through right now. I'm really not wanting to do that. I know full well how hard this is. But I actually wrote stuff down. I don't know if you want to get into this now, but I wrote down stuff that I did last year that I found incredibly helpful.
Hugh, I love this. Go for it.
I wrote down 4 dot points, okay? The first dot point is the news. I don't know about you or people in Sydney or across Australia right now, but I found for the first month of lockdown last year in Melbourne, so the first 30 days of our 120 days, I found myself watching 2 hours of the news in the morning. Like I was just glued to the news, watching up to, and it's an incredibly negative, like demoralizing place to be right now, the news. It's so negative and it saps you of all optimism and hope, and you just get more and more gutted as you go. You don't need to watch 2 hours of the news. I'm not saying switch off completely, but just maybe you need to know how many cases there are that day, and maybe you need to know what the restrictions, and that's it. Then turn it off. Because I feel like, back last year, my daughter was waking up at 4:45 every single morning. And so I was watching BBC News for an hour. Then I'm watching ABC News at 6 o'clock in the morning from 6 till 8. And I've got 3 hours of, the news is predicated off negativity. And
it's like a fake form of adrenaline, isn't it?
It is. It's like when you drive past a car crash, everyone slows down to sort of look at it. You can't help it. The news is a bit of a car crash at the moment. Not the presenters, they're doing a wonderful job. It's just what is being presented to us. So have 5 minutes on it and that's it. For 10 minutes and go, right, that's it, I'm done. I've got the news I need to hear, and you get your updates throughout the day.
Okay.
I think that's it. The second point I've got is just the heading is people. And the example I'll give you is I think it's really important right now that you are quite selective with who you spend your time chatting to or talking to or being around, because I found for a lot of last year, my response to how I was going depended on who I just spent time with. So, and the example I give is in the studio we've got here, it's about 5 minutes from home, luckily, so I can drive here and I've got a work permit to do this work. And there's a cafe open, a really nice cafe open near this studio. And I'd go and get coffee before every single presentation or podcast thing I did. And there were 2 baristas at work there. And it was very quiet, and they would take it in turns each day. One of the baristas was really negative. He was just like, oh, I cannot believe this is happening again. And I'd talk to him, and I'd subconsciously, I'd kind of take on his mood. I'd kind of feel like he did. And then I'd go and do this podcast, and I'd be all these chats, and I'd felt myself just being really affected by someone I chatted to for 2 minutes while he made my coffee. I really like him, but that was kind of his go-to. He was very down in the dumps about it all. And then there's a girl, this lovely girl called June, who, when she was on there, I'd just say, how you going? And she would say, yeah, really good. Had the best conversation with this person who just came in just before. And then, and she just always told me the good stuff every single time. And I'd always walk away from that feeling like the next person I chatted to, I didn't subconsciously, I'm kind of channeling my inner June. Like I'm really positive about everything. So I think being a little bit more selective, I think it's a good lesson in life for all of us to hang around the people that make us feel good. But I think particularly right now, if you only have a few conversations every day, I'm sure everyone can think about that person in their life who's just this beacon of positivity. And I've got a friend called Al who every time you speak to him, actually, whenever I ask him how he's going, he answered the same way you did, Mia. He says, never better. He always says that.
Except he wasn't being sarcastic.
Yeah. True. But it did remind me of him because you said it with a big smile.
Yeah.
So I think being a little bit selective with who you're going to be influenced by at the moment, because and I know some people might be locked in a house with people who are quite negative, and that does make it quite tough. But who do you know that's positive? Schedule time to chat to them. So positive people is my second point. The third one is about social media. I could go on forever about social media. It's not what I'm here to do today, but I think for now, I feel like, I don't know if you feel this, Mia, but there's this, everyone's this heightened sensitivity, and I think we're angrier than usual, which makes sense. I know sense, but we're, the people on social media that potentially their posts evoke a negative emotion in you. Maybe it's they annoy you because of their opinion. Maybe it's a jealousy thing. You see somebody jealous of how good their life is, or maybe it's someone who's just always showing off, or maybe it's. I think just for now, I don't think it's healthy to do this all the time, to only follow the people that agree with you. But I just feel like this time, maybe stop following the people that bring negative emotion out in you. Because what I learned through lockdown was we turned to social media to feel like we're connected because we so desperately want connection. It's not real connection when you're passively scrolling through Instagram, but we're sort of stuck there at the moment. And I think if you're going to be stuck in that place, don't spend an hour having this negative emotion coming up, because it's going to be heightened. It's going to be more than usual. You'll be more jealous than usual. You'll be more angry than usual. You'll be more sensitive than usual. You'll be more easily offended than usual because our anxiety, we're on edge. We're just so on edge at the moment. So I think make smart decisions about saying, do you know what, for this little bit of time, and maybe forever, I'm not going to follow this person.
Yeah.
Here's my last point. Have something that you look back on and say, if it wasn't for COVID, I wouldn't have done this, and it's a really good thing. So, for example, if it wasn't for COVID last year, if it wasn't for lockdown last year, I wouldn't have started seeing a psychologist. And seeing a psychologist is one of the best things I've ever done in my entire life. And there's no way I would have done it if it wasn't for lockdown last year.
I'm so glad you didn't tell me to make a sourdough starter.
Yeah, I'm not, yeah.
So you mean like a little thing, like I wouldn't have watched that movie, or I wouldn't have got to sleep in on a Wednesday?
No, I'm thinking of a way that you have steered your life in a more positive direction.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a couple of examples. I'm trying to give a relatable one. I don't want to say anything. I'm trying very hard not to say something that people have already heard, because I feel like everyone's got an opinion on do this. Everyone should do this. And it's great. It's so good as all this advice, but I'm just trying to think of something that so people don't switch off and go, yeah, mate, I've heard this. But I'm very lucky. I've been a happy person my entire life. Last year, I really struggled, and I saw a psychologist, and I unraveled all this stuff about my life that I desperately needed to address that I hadn't been, because things were fine. You know, they weren't amazing, they weren't bad. And I saw a psychologist because I was struggling with COVID, and all of a sudden I've resolved all this stuff from my life that I needed to.
Okay, yeah, I get
If it wasn't for COVID, I wouldn't have done that. There's no way. I was in this habit of, like, at dinner time, the first month of lockdown in Melbourne last year, I was like, well, I'm going to have a couple of glasses of red. I'll watch something I want to watch on television. That'd be great. And I kind of realised after a month that if I have 2 glasses of wine before I go to bed, first of all, I don't sleep as well. When I wake up in the morning, I'm a bit anxious, a bit more. I'm not usually an anxious, but I feel anxious for the first couple of hours. And then I also don't make good decisions around what I eat the next day. If I've had a couple of wines, I just kind of crave unhealthy foods. And I was like, that's fine. It's lockdown. Like, it's just, that's okay. I can do that. But after a month and changing my psyche about it, she said, okay, so you've done that. Now maybe you could make some changes that force you to be a bit healthier, not just for lockdown, but for the rest of your life. I was like, oh, okay. And so the spare room, my wife and I, Penny, turned into this, like, had to put a speaker in there. We cleared it out, put a couple of, like, yoga mats. And I'm not saying everyone do yoga, but we had really nice music playing in there. And instead of drinking wine and lying on the couch, both of us, or one of us, would go in there and do, like, for me, I did, like, strengthening exercises for my legs, so I could run better, and I'd do half an hour of that every single night, listen to really nice music, and I'd have a green tea instead of red wine, and then I'd go to bed. I slept so much better. I felt so much better about myself in the morning. I made healthier decisions the next day, and I did it all throughout the second lockdown, right? And it was great. And I look back on that. When I think about that right now, I have really fond memories of that. But the thing is, the second we came out of lockdown, I stopped doing it. I was like, I'm fine now, don't need to do it. But I actually missed that. And when this lockdown happened again in Melbourne, I was like, oh, that's my excuse. I've got to get back into that because I love that. And I had a really wonderful summer with my running because I do it competitively. And if it wasn't for lockdown, I wouldn't have had that amazing summer because I spent half an hour every single night doing my hamstring strengthening exercises. I'm not saying to everyone, work on your hammies. I'm saying maybe just get a half an hour to yourself at night where you're doing something which you know is really good for you. Now, some people might be going, I hate this advice. I just want to drink, and that's what makes me happy at the moment. So you can get stuffed. I'm not saying, again, I'm not saying be like me. I'm just saying I developed a routine in my day, which I wouldn't have developed if it wasn't for COVID, and it really worked for me, made me feel a lot better. So I don't even know what to call that last point, but Sydney and everyone, when you get out of lockdown and in a year's time, you look back on this time in your life, have something where you go, it doesn't have to be cooking sourdough, but where you went, that bit there, not the whole thing, but that little bit there, that was good for me.
I'm Mia Friedman, and you're listening to No Filter with Hugh van Cuylenberg from the Resilience Project. Whether people are in lockdown or not, the last 18 months has, I think, done everyone's head in. I don't know if that's a technical term. Mental ill health, whether you have depression or anxiety or grief or whatever it is that you're going through, I think all our heads are a little bit scrambled. There are 3 things that you've discovered are the principles of resilience, and you started, or this epiphany came to you, and you decided you wanted to learn more about resilience when you were working as a teacher in, is it India? In a little village?
Yeah, far north India. Yeah.
And you met a little kid, and can you just tell the story of him?
To lead you up to that, I, from a very young age, was quite fascinated in what is it that makes people happy, because my sister, as many people will know, when she was 14 years old, she was diagnosed with anorexia nervosa, an eating disorder. And this is in the 90s when we weren't really talking much about mental health, so I didn't know what it was. But fast forward 4 years, she's in hospital because she's dropped below crisis weight. She's 5'6", 5'7", and she was weighing about 31 kilograms. So there's nothing of her. And it was awful. I mean, that's an understatement. It's one of the worst things I've ever been through. And I remember going back from the hospital that night, and I remember seeing my dad in tears. And I feel like most people can remember the times they saw their parents cry. It's a horrific thing to happen. It was like the second time I'd ever seen Dad cry. And I remember at age 18 thinking, we're not a happy family anymore. We used to be, we're not anymore. And I became very fascinated at that point with what is it that makes people happy. I knew I couldn't fix my sister, but gosh, I wanted to know what I could do to maybe help Mum and Dad and my brother. And anyway, I didn't have an answer to that. I had no idea what to do. But 10 years later, as you say, Mia, I was up in the Himalayas and I was a volunteer teacher. And when I got there and discovered that, no running water, no electricity, you're sleeping on the floor, I remember thinking, this is meant to be 2 weeks. I'll be out of here in 2 nights. There is no way I'm staying here, not a chance. But my first day in the school, I met this kid in grade 3 whose name was Stunzen. And I remember after half an hour in his presence just thinking to myself, I have never in my life, I have never, ever seen joy like this before. This kid's the happiest person I've ever met. I remember thinking, how's this even possible? I'm looking out across the desert thinking there's nothing here. There is nothing that we would consider valuable. The most extraordinary view of the Himalayas you'll ever see. But apart from that, I was like, there's nothing here. How's this kid so happy? And the 2-week trip turned into 3.5 months because I was so in love with this place and I was so in love with these people. Like it was joy like I'd never seen before. And yet, after school, everyone just goes to a mud hut in their different families and they sit around and drink tea together. Not just one of the mum and dad, the other mum and dad's at work and kids going to sport, everyone, the whole family, the extended family, the neighbours, they sit around, they talk about their day. And I'd never seen anything like it. And so I stayed there and I tried to work out what is it these people do. And what I discovered was every single day they practice gratitude, they practice empathy, and they practice mindfulness. And
Gratitude, empathy,
gratitude,
mindfulness. And how did this little kid do that?
Well, the acronym for everyone to remember, if they'll remember, is GEM, which is just amazing. I still can't believe it's got this perfect acronym: gratitude, empathy, mindfulness.
GEM.
Like a lot of people say to me, I'm still doing GEM, which I really love. So this kid, with gratitude, when he saw something he was grateful for, he just stopped and pointed to it. And he would try and say the word this, but he couldn't pronounce the TH. So it was really cute. He'd say this. And I'd say, do you mean this? Because I'm the English teacher trying to help him with his pronunciation. And he'd say, no, this. And I go, yeah, this. He'd go, no, this. I go, that'll do. So things like his shoes, like tying up his shoelaces. I walked past him, sir, this. What he was saying was, how lucky am I? I got shoes on my feet. Some of the kids here don't have shoes, but I do.
Oh, wow.
Lunchtime would come around. A lot of the kids couldn't afford to bring lunch to school, so they were fed rice, just rice, nothing else. He would look at me with his rice and say, sir, this. What he was saying was, I get fed here. I get fed here every single day. How lucky am I? So he would, and he also was in good moments. Like if he caught himself in a good moment, he would stop and, it might be Bollywood dancing, it might be playing cricket, it might be in a lesson that he's enjoying. Sir, this, like right now.
So it's like he identified joy.
Yeah.
That he was pointing to.
He was like, this is happening right now. How lucky am I? Like, and so to me, that was gratitude like I'd never seen before, the ability so gratitude's the ability to pay attention to what we've got, not worry about what we don't have. And we struggle with that in Australia massively. So many of us live off this model of happiness called the if and then model of happiness. If I buy this car, then I feel happy. If I buy this house, then I feel happy. If I get this promotion, if I have this many followers. Nothing wrong with wanting that stuff. Don't pin your happiness to it. It doesn't work. Don't attach happiness to it because it's not the thing you don't have. It's the fact you want something from external to bring joy. And then you get that, then you need something else external to bring joy. And we're never satisfied. So joy comes from gratitude is when you look at what you already have. We've got so much here in Australia already, but we miss the things we have all the time. Even at a time like COVID right now, we're doing it really tough. But my gosh, I remember it was a little while ago in India, there was 350,000 positive cases. There was a friend of mine who lives in India. He said, I saw a fight. He said there was a fight there was a queue to get into the hospital 300 metres long, and I saw 2 families, kids, mums, fighting over an oxygen tank.
Oh, my God.
And so I'm not saying to everyone, come on, someone else has got it worse off somewhere else, because that's annoying. And I guess I am kind of saying that. I guess I am kind of saying
Just a little bit.
Yeah. But I think I think it's more. I'm trying to steer it away from that point more towards just let's just pay attention to what we've got, and that is we've got room in the hospitals right now. We've got a lot of things that people don't have in other countries. I think. But I mean, I read a quote this morning which I really loved, and I think it speaks to this a little bit. So if you're struggling, you're struggling. And this is the quote that I read, which I really loved. And I don't know who wrote it, so it's a bit frustrating. But so whoever you are, you deserve a lot of credit for this. So is in regards to what's happening right now. It says, we are not all in the same boat. We're in the same storm. Some have yachts, some have canoes, and some are drowning. And I really like that as far as like you can – some people are really struggling, absolutely. But even if you're in a yacht right now in a storm, it's still treacherous. Like it's still scary. It's still uncertain, all that kind of stuff. And so I think that's a nice quote to kind of summarize. And again, whoever did that, I'm sorry I'm not crediting you with that. But yeah, I just think understanding that we're all battling is important.
So the gratitude and the mindfulness I get, is the mindfulness kind of recognizing the joy when it's there or being aware of how we feel?
Yeah, it can be. I mean, to me, mindfulness has always been just the ability to be wherever you are, right? Like just be wherever you are. I had a psychologist at a conference say not too long ago, we spend 49% of our day thinking about the future and 34% of our day thinking about the past, which gives us 15% of our day where we're focused on what's happening as it's happening. And I was thinking, no, that can't be right. But then the next 24 hours, I was really cognizant of that. In fact, I set my alarm to go off every hour, and when it went off, I was like, what are you thinking about right now? And it wasn't far off that. It wasn't, maybe once or twice throughout the day I was thinking about what was happening. But, it's, and I'm not saying we're bad people, but you know what that feels like. It's sitting at the dinner table and 5 minutes later you realise you haven't listened to a word anyone said because you're thinking about an issue you've got to deal with the next day or a problem that took place during the day or someone you're going to conversation you had during whatever it is. I think we just got to get better at being wherever we are. And that to me is mindfulness. However you do it, whether it's meditation, whether it's yoga, whether it's walking a lap of the block and just paying attention to what you can hear, whatever teaches you to just spend time being aware of what's happening as it's happening, that's what mindfulness is to me. But it works nicely with gratitude, right? The more present you are, the more likely you are to notice the good stuff happening around you. And
the E in GEM, the empathy, is that thinking about the people who are doing it tougher?
I'm looking at it from more of a selfish point of view, to be honest. I'm looking at it from more of a, which sounds funny with the word empathy, but maybe selfish is the wrong word. But at this point in time, it's about how do we help people look after themselves. So empathy to me is, well, by its very definition, it's when you feel what someone else feels. And the research around that says the more empathetic you are, the more likely you are to act in a kind way. And the neuroscience behind kindness is life-changing. It says when you do something nice for someone else, your brain releases this hormone oxytocin, and oxytocin is the feel-good hormone that makes us feel emotions like love, joy, connectedness, all these things, gratitude. So not outrageously big acts of kindness. I'm talking about small things, holding the door open for someone, shouting someone a coffee, letting someone into traffic, giving someone a compliment. Those little things, when you do that, your brain releases oxytocin and it makes you feel happy. I'm not saying it's why we should just be happy to make ourselves feel good, but it's nice to know that we're actually hardwired to be kind, like we're rewarded for being kind. And then to bring it back to this kid in India, I did this talk for a group of neurosurgeons a bit over a year ago, literally brain surgeons. That's an intimidating audience. And one of them put his hand up as I was talking about the brain. And I remember going, oh, fuck, what am I doing? I'm talking about the brain to neurosurgeons. And he said, hey, that kid you were talking about in India. And I said, yeah. And he said, was he kind? And I said, without exaggeration, he's one of the kindest people I've ever met. I said, he is the kindest person I've ever met. And he interrupted me and he said, and from our point of view, he said, no, from my point of view of what I know about the brain, that's why he's so happy, because his brain never discriminates. And I said, what do you mean by that? And he said, well, if he does something nice to someone else, his brain doesn't say, no, mate, you sleep on the floor, no running water here, no electricity, you don't get oxytocin. He said this before COVID. He said, we always have access to joy and happiness, and it comes through doing things for other people, no matter what you're going through in life. And that was pretty profound, I thought, from someone much smarter than me.
That's amazing. And so how can you do that when you're in lockdown or when you are feeling let's take it out of lockdown and make it much broader. How do you do that when you are feeling at a low ebb, when you might be struggling with mental ill health? How can you pay it forward and do something kind for someone else?
Well, I have a tangible example for you. So someone I know, we've known each other since we were about 12 or 13, really good friend, met him through sport. And he's got 4 kids under the age of 8 and a substantial mortgage. And last year during COVID, he had put all his money into a business and the business went under and no longer exists. And he's got no job, 4 kids, young kids, and a mortgage. And he was really feeling it. He's an accountant by trade, very logical brain, very practical, and he was battling. And I didn't know, but he was listening to one of my talks online. I didn't know he'd logged in, but he was there. And he went away and put this empathy thing into practice the way he did it. I'm not saying everyone does this, but this is how he did it, just the way his brain works. He drew up a spreadsheet on Excel, which had 10 names down the y-axis and then 10 different acts of kindness along the x-axis.
Oh my God.
Put it on his fridge, and every morning when he got his breakfast out, he would get the chart off and he'd have it in front of him, and he'd choose a person and link it to a different act of kindness, and he'd do that thing, whether it was send someone a message saying, I love you, or I got your back, I'm here for you, whatever it is, or if it was sending someone some flowers, or whether it was sending someone a song on YouTube they might like, or whether it was writing someone a letter and hand delivering it to, or like delivering it in the mail or getting it sent to them. And he said to me at the end of it, he said, mate, it's like, he said, I loved it and I knew I was enjoying it, but I stopped doing it when we came out of lockdown. I was like, good, I've done that. But I realized I missed it so much. I've gone back to it now and we're not in lockdown. He's probably back into it now again. And he said it was really life-changing. It was really life-changing. So for him, again, I think the point of that all is they don't have to be really outrageously big things. It could be when you're going for a walk, stopping and chatting to someone from a safe distance. It could be if you've got an elderly neighbour. And I know this sounds like a cliched thing to do it. People put it out there as a cliched thing to do it. But I challenge someone to try it and then not be totally changed or moved by it. Like go and ring the doorbell of an elderly neighbour and just say, hey, how you going? And just ask them, let them talk. Let them talk. If they're lonely, that it'll mean so much to them and you've done something really kind.
Who are the least resilient people among us and why?
Good question. In my experience, it's people who are desperately seeking recognition or status or love from external places, as in they're not giving themselves unconditional love. Like they need other people to constantly recognize and tell them how good they are. And I feel like that's not a very sustainable model for being happy. And when you don't get that, well, when you do get that, you're desperately seeking it even more, you know. And I'm not, I feel like I'm having a go at a certain group of people. I'm not at all. I'm empathizing with them or sympathizing with them and saying like, well, so I'll give you an example. So I do these talks all over the country the last 10 years, right? And I didn't realize it, but I've become quite addicted to the really nice comments I was getting from people after shows. I do a show and then I go and chat to people in the audience and I like getting a lot of hugs and lots of photos of people and signing books and get lovely comments along the way, right? Really lovely stuff. And I didn't realize it, but over the course of 10 years, I'd become a little bit addicted to that. And then when lockdown happened last year in Melbourne and there was no more live shows and I was doing them over Zoom, and then I'd go, okay, thanks for coming, and hang up, and there was no feedback at all. I noticed in myself, my Instagram use went through the roof. I was posting photos and things, and I realized that I think in reflection, I was like crowdsourcing my self-esteem a little bit. Like, I'll get some nice comments here and I'll get this and people will say that. And I was like, well, hang on a minute. This is not a healthy way to be happy. Like, that's not where that's not where joy comes from. Why are you seeking it through social media? And that was a point in my life where I didn't feel overly resilient. So maybe I'm just projecting what I went through myself. A time when I didn't feel resilient was when I was looking for love from external places rather than just remembering. I think we all have to remember that we're all worthy as we are. Like, we're all worthy of love as we are, and we don't need to be achieving these certain things or doing these things, and we don't have to have this many people follow us or like us. We are worthy as we are. We're worthy of love as we are.
I once met a woman. I was at a conference and I looked over and there was this woman who had this incredible presence about her, and I asked someone who she was, and I found out that she was someone who'd experienced a major tragedy. Her children and father had been murdered by her ex-partner. And I was having a bad day for some reason, like there'd been traffic or something like that. And I ended up going and introducing myself, and I got to know her a little bit. And in the course of doing this podcast, I've met a number of people who've experienced the most extraordinary tragedies. And one of the things that they hate hearing, they tell me, is when people say to them, I just don't know how you can get out of bed every day, because I wouldn't be able to if I was in your situation. How do they get out of bed every day when there are some people who are felled by things that seem far less significant, and other people who cope with the most extraordinary tragedy and, you know, can keep on living and even thriving?
Yeah, one of my favourite books I've ever read, I think I might say it's by Lee Sales. I should know that it's one of my favourite books.
Any Ordinary Day.
Where she talks, yeah, thank you. Yeah, where she just explores that what happens straight after a traumatic event. And there was one that really stood out with me with a lady who answered the door one day. Her two kids are in the other room, and it was the police saying that her husband had drowned when he had gone out for a swim in the surf. And this woman, the thing I'll never forget was I find it so hard to say this without getting teary, but she decided to let her kids have one more night thinking their dad was alive, and she didn't tell them that night. And she waited till the next morning to let them know, because she just wanted – she said they were playing happily, and I just wanted to give them one more night with thinking their dad was alive. And I'm telling that story because I still don't understand. I don't know the answer to that question. I just don't know. I've met many people doing this work that have been through the most horrific stuff, and I am in awe of them. And I feel silly when I talk to them, because I think I shouldn't be. Why am I the guy who talks about resilience? So I don't know the answer to that question, and I'm fascinated by it. And it's why I love Lee Sales' book so much, because it explored that very thing of how the fuck do you get out of bed the next day when something like that happens. I mean, I guess if you've got kids, you just don't have a choice. You just have to get on with it, don't you? Like you have to show them the way, I suppose.
I also learnt from her book that not everybody that experiences trauma gets PTSD. Some people do and some people don't.
Yeah, totally, which I find fascinating as well. The best research I've ever read on resilience is by a lady called Dr. Barbara Fredrickson, and she talks about the most common characteristic or personality characteristic amongst people who are resilient is positive emotion. So not to say you should go, come on, just be positive. It's people who, it's not to say they completely disengage with the trauma of their life, but they still find reasons to smile. They still find reasons to laugh, and they still involve themselves in activities that will bring joy. And I think that's if I can bring any evidence to that question, rather than me saying I got no idea, it would be that positive emotion is a key component to being resilient, positivity.
Thank you for the work you do. I was going to ask if it's pressure to always be strong and together, given what you do. Like whenever anyone goes, how you doing? Like, can you say I'm a bit shit?
I've learned recently that I can. And it's so funny, the timing of this year. Like the second book comes out at the end of the year, and I'm writing about how my entire life I've felt so much pressure to be okay. And especially at the start of last year's pandemic, everyone came to me like, what should we be doing? Like, and I'm talking, it was like interview after interview after interview on radio and television, like, what are we doing? And in my head, I'm thinking, I did an interview on the Today Show. I'm sitting there going, you're a fraud. Like, you're battling, and here you are going, yeah, I'm great because I do this and this and this. And it took me a little while with my psychologist to work out, like, it's okay. Like, I'm struggling like everyone else is. That's totally fine. And it's completely understandable I'm struggling. So it's taken me a while to work out that it is okay. I mean, I say to everyone all the time, it's okay to not be okay and seek help. But I felt like the guy telling people that had to be okay. And so I pretended for the first few months of COVID. I mean, it comes back to what I was saying before, really. Like, COVID has taught me that it's okay to not be okay. And because of that, I mean, I love doing these chats now. Like, I have absolutely loved chatting to you today because I can be totally honest with how it's going. I reckon if this conversation happened 14 months ago, I would have got off interview thinking, I just feel like I was being a bit fake there. Like
Yes.
I'm not great. And here I am going, and that would make me feel anxious. I wouldn't feel good about myself. But COVID has taught me that it's human to struggle, and you need to own it if you are. And well, not own it sounds a bit arrogant and a bit kind of macho-y. Not own it. I mean, just surrender to it. Like surrender to where you are, surrender to your position, and accept that. Because gee, it's much easier to pick yourself back up again when you've properly accepted where you're at. And that's it's a long answer to your question, May, but that's my answer.
I feel like I'm going to surrender to my struggles at the moment, but feel like I'm in good company, Hugh. Thank you. Thank you for all the work you do.
It's been a great pleasure to chat to Mira. I feel very privileged to be asked to be on your podcast, so thank you.
Oh, I hope that helped, or at least distracted you for a little bit of time. Things are so tough right now, so if you're struggling, the worst thing to do is to worry alone. Please call a friend or call Lifeline on 13 11 14. And if you want more of Hugh, if you want to know more about resilience, he has a podcast called The Imperfects, as well as a book called The Resilience Project, and he also tours around Australia. Border restrictions notwithstanding. The best place to find more Hugh is to start on his website, and it is theresilienceproject.com.au. We'll put a link in the show notes. The assistant producer of No Filter is Lucy Neville. The executive producer is Eliza Ratliff. I'm Mia Friedman. Hang in there, and lots of love.
Mamma Mia acknowledges the traditional owners of the land we have recorded this podcast on, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures.